Oh man, what is going on? It is Friday and welcome to the series Levels where we actually answer your questions on a weekly basis. So today, if you guys have questions, go ahead and put it in the comments. And then next week, I will be answering questions for today. Now today is actually great because we have a bunch of questions that actually have pretty short answers. So we're gonna wipe right through it pretty fast and actually give you guys some knowledge right here. And as we actually bring forth these questions that people don't know the answers to, by actually talking about them and discussing them and bringing the answers forth, we're all going to increase knowledge and rise levels in this industry. So the first question we have is, from Minerals 333, when do you use full 5-axis tool pass over 3+2 given the loose accuracy and rigidity the more axes you move? Now this is actually a really good question because people think 5-axis and you hear a lot of people online saying, that's not 5-axis, that's just 3+2. The truth is you wanna do 3+2 as much as possible and only go full simultaneous when absolutely needed. Meaning, what I mean by 3+2 is on a 5-axis, you're rotating and getting into a fixed position at an angle so you can reach a specific side of the part and get as much machining done as possible. And if you have a hole like on this side, you simply rotate, mill, and drill that hole and then keep rotating into position. Whereas 5-axis full simultaneous would be, the whole thing is contouring, all axes are moving at the exact same time. But what happens when you do that is the spindle actually can run really fast and your feed rate is crazy fast, but your table moves much slower, and in motion you lose your rigidity. So we want to lock it in place, we want to machine as much as possible, and then just in the crevices and corners of a part that you simply can't get to because there's this crazy angle on it, then you actually position it again just to get a little bit of full simultaneous, just to hit that spot perfectly. Now, 99% of parts out there are gonna be great on the 3+2. And when you're looking at the other percentage, you're talking impellers where you have these crazy fins and you just have to rotate and twist around and come back and rotate and twist around and repeat that process. And that ends up being a very long program for that part, depending on the size of it. But 3+2 is king. Only do full simultaneous when needed. All right, now remember, ask the hard questions, put it in the comments. And if you see a question that you can answer in the comments, go ahead and answer those questions right now. Now, the next one I actually love because I actually struggled with this early in my career and I kept like pulling my hair out and just like these engineers, man, they just don't get it because they kept giving me these crazy pockets with small radiuses, and therefore you probably know what the question is. I'm gonna probably mess this up, but this is from Michael Wodolowski 4397. The question is, I get a lot of aluminum parts with deep pockets and small corner radiuses. For example, like pockets that are 2.75 deep with corner radiuses of 1/8 of an inch all the way down. This is always slow and painful. How would you actually handle a feature like this? I used to make a ton of microwave parts where you just had all of these different pockets with small radiuses, and you can actually hog everything down, but then it is a pain to just go smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But what I actually ended up doing was I just took a face mill, I face milled, made everything flat. And then to get an 1/8 inch radius, I went with a 1/4 inch drill, self-centering, coolant through, that I could just jam straight through that breaks up little chips and stuff. So it just goes straight down to the bottom. And I actually just pre-drilled all the corners, boom, 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 boom. And once the holes are drilled, I'll go with a 1/2 inch or 3/4. I'll simply helical down, assuming it's aluminum and you have a lot of coolant, I'll just helical down and basically plow all the material out, go down, plow the material out, plow it, make sure all the chips are evacuated, and then come back with a 1/2 inch 4 to 6 flute tool. Come in, put some pressure, nice low RPM so you have no chatter, and actually come in, finish it, finish it, finish it, all the way down, make it absolutely beautiful. And then in the corner, you simply have your drilled hole with this little lip right there. So there's barely any material there. And that's when you come back with a 1/4 inch end mill. And then let's go with a 4 flute tool. So your core is nice and strong in there. If you go to a 2 flute, you'll be weak and have more chatter. And then we basically just drop in, then we just kind of like rough, 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 and then come back, finish, finish, finish. And then when I do that corner, I just stay a few tenths off where you can't see, but it doesn't actually dig in from the finish pass. All right, so our next question is from 1320 Pass. What is the maximum percentage of total capacity, machine, personnel, and revenue that you would dedicate to one single customer? Question for smaller guys that want to avoid putting too many eggs in one basket and risking a big hit if the customer pulls out. So I'm actually an expert in this because when I was building my shop, man, I was grinding, and you're looking for the great customers that can just make your company. And mine was Schilling Robotics, so I stepped in. The work was amazing. I actually performed well on the work, and literally they were giving me as much work as I could handle, and my profit margin was so big. So that one customer became over 50% of my company, and then came the 2008, 2009 downfall. They lost all of their contracts, everything got shelved, and then I went through the craziest couple years of my entire life trying to save my company. So this one hits home. Now, if you want a good answer, I would say 10 to 20% max, and that's in a perfect world. But truthfully, would I have done it again, knowing everything that I know? Absolutely, I would have done it, because I was at this level. And all the work from Schilling and the partnership and taking care of them and the love that they had for us allowed us to get more equipment and go to a higher level machine shop. So I went from like 6 machines to 20 machines inside of just a couple years. And then my mindset changed. So although I went through a couple years of heartache and a couple years of suffering, I had tasted success on the high level. So I knew how to get back there. So once 2010 came, I actually just worked my way back to that level of manufacturing, and I got there. And then I diversified and brought in SpaceX and Blue Origin and Lockheed and Boeing and all these different companies, and then got the skills to be on camera to talk to you guys about all of it. But one of the most important things that I can actually say is a shop owner needs a gut instinct. If it's too good to be true and it seems and you're scared about it, then don't do it. Be cautious. And sometimes you have to turn away work. And sometimes taking on too much work, it will kill your company because you can't afford the materials, the outside process, the payroll. You're working crazy hours and you're putting strain on your family. All of these things is real because machining is a grind. But if you find a customer that actually has great work, if you actually look into that company and that industry, you see a future and you're like, this is the future, and I'm getting with them on the ground floor, and they're willing to give you blanket orders, so not just a single purchase order, but they're actually breaking it up. So you're like every 6 weeks, you're delivering parts over a year. You get the right contracts, then absolutely, if I'm a small company, I might let a company like that become 30, 40% of my company, because then right there, I'm bringing peace into my life, I'm bringing stability into my shop, and I'm making good money. So when I'm making good money, I'm not thinking this is a forever thing. I'm building infrastructure on the side. I'm bringing the right team in on the side. I'm working on my sales on the side. So I'm using this company as fuel, as a bloodline, to actually increase my company in other ways, so that a year later, I'm actually more diversified. I have more manufacturing and more everything. And the shop overall is just thriving. So use your gut instinct, get the right contracts, knowing that as you grow and you reach the level that you want to be at, you are completely diversified across all successful industries and companies that are forward thinking, that you have confidence in. All right, this is the next question, and this is long, so I'm gonna kind of summarize it. So it's from XX Lathe Attic XX. Love the question. The question is long, so I'm gonna kind of summarize it, but he's basically saying, hey, this might get buried, but I feel it's an important question for everyone in industry, and it's a question might be pointed more at Tyson, given the background. But I think lathe work holding, more importantly, what can you get away with? How do you actually determine how to hold a part and how much force to actually exert into that material so the part actually doesn't get thrown out of the chuck? And he basically goes on to say, every time you actually have a lathe job, you're wondering, how am I gonna hold it? How much pressure am I gonna use so on and so forth. So since he called out my son Tyson, on the way to work, I actually texted this question to my son and I said, hey, I need your help real quick. Can you come help answer a question? So Tyson, what's up? What, 18 years? Yeah. 18 years working here at the company. When Tyson first came in, I put him right on the lathes because my first love was mills. I used to do both of them, but I'm like, you know, if we're gonna have a family business and I love the mills and 5-axis and all that, I need to train my son to be an amazing lathe guy. And he's far surpassed. He's the only one without haters. Like he just dissects crazy jobs and crazy machines and does it so smoothly because of that experience.
I'm sure I've got haters. They can let me know in the comments.
He's too much of a nice guy. So this actually is a great question, Tyson. So they're talking about like how do you determine the pressure, how to actually hold lathe parts, and like what's the secret science on that?
Yeah, I do think a lot of it does come with the experience running lathes. So the more you run them, you kind of figure out what you can get away with. You kind of learn the limits as you're running more jobs. Yeah. So there are a couple of rules that I think you can follow when you're doing your setups. So for first operations where you have raw stock or you're running bar stock, I like to run serrated jaws or something with a little bit of grip. Even with the Royal collets, you can get serrated ones that can grip onto raw stock. And that just lets you get a good grip on the material because for the Op 1 stuff, that's usually where you're going to be putting a lot of your tool pressure on. You're going to be taking your heaviest cuts, and you want to make sure that bar isn't going to move at all. And also for your first operations, that's where you crank up your chuck pressure as much as you can get away with. So usually on most of our jobs before, it was like 250, 300 PSI. So you grip onto it, make sure it doesn't move, and
get after it.
Set yourself up for the most success on your first operations. And then when you get to your second operations on your second chuck, that's when you start looking at soft jaws. You figure out what surface you're grabbing onto. If it's a thin wall, you might be using pie jaws, or you might look at 6-jaw chucks. Basically on those operations, you start to turn down the PSI. So I would say a good starting PSI would be 150 to 200. And if you have a thinner wall, that's when you go down to maybe even 100 or lower. But you're looking for as strong as a grip as you can get away with without leaving any marks on the material or distorting it.
And I think that's one of the things with pie jaws. I mean, we have a million sets of pie jaws, like some huge ones and small ones and for repeat jobs and stuff. But when it comes to pie jaws, you can cut a full diameter, where sometimes with chuck jaws, they'll actually hit in 3 places and dent the material and actually put pressure where the material, if it's like something really thin, it might bow out in between the jaws and stuff. But having aluminum pie jaws or even steel pie jaws, you can actually cut a perfect circle that'll actually encompass the entire diameter, and therefore you don't need that much pressure. So when you run thin walled stuff, 100% pie jaws, or even grabbing it internally and actually grabbing as much as possible. Yeah.
Remember, there is a trade-off. You might try to do like super long jaws and stuff, but there is a trade-off because the longer the jaws are, the less kind of pressure that's getting on at the end of the jaws. So sometimes it helps having a stubbier, like a normal 1 to 2 inch set, but getting as good of a grip as you can on the inside. One other thing to think about when you're doing those second operations is what direction of cut you're doing. Because when you're not grabbing onto a part as sturdy as the first op, suddenly you want to put pressure on towards the chuck. Even if I have like a 1/4 inch that I have to take off the front of the part, sometimes I'll start by cutting the OD of the part because I'm putting all my tool pressure towards the chuck. And then at the very end, I'll do lighter cuts to face the part, because when you're doing the facing operation, that's putting more pressure on, the front of the part. So that's where your risk of like knocking the part out.
Absolutely. Yep. Strategy is king. So think about everything and actually work towards the rigidity of your workpiece right there. You know how this guy actually learned lathes? When he came to work for me, I put him under a great lathe machinist that I had working. And all these complicated jobs, this guy would program and figure out. And we were doing like crazy SpaceX jobs. We were doing crazy aerospace jobs and stuff. And then he taught Tyson how to set up the machines. And basically for 5 years, he just set up all these complicated jobs. And then one day that guy didn't come to work and we had like a bunch of SpaceX jobs and he had never programmed before. And I'm like, you have watched it, you have set up, you've done everything. In 2 weeks, we have to finish all of this work. So we're gonna actually teach you how to program right now and go make that happen. And he got the work done. They were flawless, crazy tolerances, crazy parts. And we still have some of the parts up front.
No, I tell everyone when they come in, a lot of these lathe parts up front, we used to do that. That's what we used to run, and
That's
some
it.
of the first parts I programmed. So
Boom.
get thrown into the fire, you learn quick. You know, if you have any more lathe questions or you want to see me back up here, let us know in the comments.
In the comments, baby, levels. All right, so let's end this episode right here and make sure you guys, what questions do you guys have? Hard questions, machining, technical questions, anything to do with job shops, production facilities, automation, tooling, machining, anything, put it in the comments. We'll look at it and we'll answer as many as possible next Friday. I love you guys. Let's rise levels together, baby. Boom.